The floorboard by the front door creaked again. I always meant to fix it, but never got around to it. Verity used to say that this floorboard was our housekeeper, warning us when guests arrived. Now it's a reminder that she's no longer here. I am 75 years old and live alone in the house I built with my own hands 40 years ago. Every corner here holds memories. The kitchen with a large oak table where Verity and I drank our morning coffee. The living room with a fireplace in front of which I laid the first parquet floor. The garden behind the house, where I grew roses for my wife every summer. Even the old oak tree by the fence, in whose shade Terrence played as a child, seems to be the guardian of my past, a silent witness to a life that is no longer there. Our house in South Burlington stands on a small hill. From here, there is a view of Lake Champlain, which is especially beautiful at sunset. Verity loved to sit on the porch and watch the sun sink below the horizon, leaving a golden trail on the water. She died 3 years ago, in October. The doctors talked about lung cancer, about metastases, about how there was nothing that could be done. And I, a man who had spent his whole life solving problems, found myself powerless. I remember holding her hand in the hospital, so fragile, with protruding veins. She squeezed my fingers and said, "Don't be sad for too long, Jervis." But how could I do that? How can you not be sad when half of you is gone? 48 years of marriage, and now only photographs on the walls. I haven't touched her things. Her dresses still hang in the closet. Her books are on the shelves with her bookmarks. Her reading glasses are on the bedside table. Sometimes I feel like she just went out into the garden and will be back soon. Every time I hear the floorboards creak, I think for a moment that it's her footsteps. It's silly, but my heart still skips a beat with hope, which is immediately shattered by reality. I was a corporate lawyer specializing in mergers and acquisitions. My career was successful. I was a partner in a prestigious firm, had clients from the Fortune 500 list, and was respected by my colleagues. My work taught me to be meticulous and pedantic. Order is what I value above all else. Every morning starts the same way. Up at 6, a contrast shower, then coffee without sugar, and 2 slices of toast with orange marmalade. I read the newspaper from the back page, a habit Verity always teased me about. She laughed about it, but I could see that she liked this trait of mine. Perhaps my predictability gave her a sense of security. When I look at my hands, I see how they have changed. The veins have swollen, the skin has become thin and dry, and the age spots have become more pronounced. But my grip is still strong. I can still fix a faucet, change a light bulb, or prune the roses in the garden. The years are taking their toll, but I resist old age as best I can. Every morning I do exercises, monitor my blood pressure, and take vitamins. What's the point of living to be 75 if your body gives out before your mind does? Or conversely, what good is a healthy body if your mind is clouded? My father died of Alzheimer's. I remember how he looked at me with empty eyes, not recognizing me. That's what I fear most, losing myself before I lose my life. My son Terrence comes to visit once a month, usually on the first Saturday. I know exactly when he will arrive, at 3:45 p.m. I know he will bring his wife Primrose, who will smile at me with her fake smile. I know they will stay for lunch but decline dinner, citing business commitments. And I know, this is the saddest part, that they only come for the money. Terrence has never been like me. He inherited my father-in-law's character, impulsive, emotional, fickle. When I was younger, I thought I could teach him discipline, but I failed. He studied art in college, then changed jobs several times, never staying at anyone for more than a year. Now he works as a consultant for an interior design firm. At least that's what he says. I've never seen his work, never heard of his clients. Sometimes I think his whole career is a fiction, a beautiful facade hiding emptiness. I never understood Primrose. She is 15 years younger than Terrence, always well-dressed, always impeccably made up. She doesn't talk much, but when she does, her words sound rehearsed, as if she's practiced them in front of a mirror. Verity didn't like her, though she never said so directly. "There's something wrong with her, Jervis," she said to me once. "She looks at our house as if she's already trying on the curtains." I dismissed it at the time, but now I realize that Verity, as always, saw right through people. Their wedding was lavish, disproportionately expensive for a young couple with no income of their own. I paid for everything, of course. Terrence, after Verity's death, our relationship with our son became even more strained. Terrence began to visit less often and call less. When he did show up, the conversation invariably turned to money. The car had broken down, the roof needed to be repaired, college debts were still hanging over him. I never said no, although I often wanted to. Verity always defended Terrence, finding excuses for him. He's just different, Jervis. Not like you. But he's a good boy. And I believed her because she saw things in people that I didn't notice. I helped him, of course. What else could a father do? But each time the amount grew larger and the gratitude less. The last time they visited, Terrence didn't even ask about my health. He started talking about his financial problems as soon as he walked in the door. I listened and nodded, but inside I was growing irritated. Without her, my son and I are like two strangers who happen to be related. In the photo, Verity is smiling, that special smile I love so much. The picture was taken on our 40th wedding anniversary. We went to Italy, to a small town on the coast where we had once spent our honeymoon. She looked so happy then, so alive. Who could have thought that 3 years later she would be gone? That this photo would be one of the last? Almost all of my friends are gone now. Some have died, some have moved closer to their children, some to nursing homes. Loneliness has become my constant companion. Sometimes I talk to Verity as if she were still here. I tell her about the weather, the news that her favorite peonies are blooming. At times like these, I think I hear her laughter or footsteps in the next room. Doctors call it a normal reaction to loss. But what do they know about normal when it comes to losing half of your soul? The neighbors sometimes drop by. Albert Paxton, who lives on the left, brings fresh pastries from his wife. Evelyn Morris, a widow across the street, invites me over for tea. They are good people, but the conversations with them are superficial, about the weather, city news, politics. None of them knew me in my youth, saw me before time, and grief bent my shoulders. They only see an old man who lives alone in a house that is too big. The only thing that seems to keep Terrence around is the inheritance. I have savings, a house, investments. I've always been careful with money, preferring security to risk. Verity used to joke that I could teach even a Scotsman how to save. Now that money is the only reason my son still maintains the appearance of a family relationship. It's a bitter thought, but I can't shake it, especially after his last visit. Sometimes I think about changing my will, leaving the money to someone else instead of Terrence, or disposing of it in some other way. But to whom? I have no other children, no close friends to whom I could entrust my inheritance. And every time this thought crosses my mind, I hear Verity's voice. He's our son, Jervis. No matter what happens, he'll always be our son. Today I found a postcard from Terrence in the mailbox. He usually calls when he's coming to visit. The postcard was cheap with a picture of an autumn landscape. We'll be there on Saturday in time for dinner, he wrote in his hurried handwriting. No salutation, no signature. Just information, as if he were sending a notification rather than writing to his father. I put the postcard on the mantelpiece, next to Verity's photo, and stared at them for a long time. 20 years ago, I would have been delighted by my son's visit. 10 years ago, I would have taken it for granted. Now I feel only fatigue and a kind of dull irritation. Something has changed, broken between us, and I don't know how to fix it. Or maybe I don't want to try anymore. Tomorrow I'll make dinner, as always. I'll get out the good wine that Terrence likes but never buys himself. I'll listen to his stories about work, his plans, his problems. I'll give him money if he asks, and I'll wait for them to leave so I can be alone again with the silence and my memories. Maybe that's how it should be. Maybe it's payback for always putting work before family. For those weekends when I went to the office instead of going to baseball with Terrence. For those evenings when I read contracts instead of bedtime stories. Verity said I was building a wall between myself and my son, brick by brick. I didn't listen then. Now the wall is so high that neither of us can climb over it. I look out the window at my garden. The roses have faded. The leaves on the trees have turned yellow and are falling. Winter will soon be here. Another winter in an empty house where every sound echoes. And I realize that the worst thing about old age is not illness or infirmity. The worst thing is the realization that the only thing that connects you to your own child is the money he will receive after your death. They arrived on Thursday, not Saturday, as promised in the postcard. I was just finishing my afternoon tea when I heard the sound of an engine and the screech of brakes on the driveway. Terrence's car is a used dark blue Volvo that he bought 3 years ago, insisting it was an excellent investment. Since then, I have given him money at least 5 times to repair this excellent investment. I got up from the table and pulled back the curtain. Terrence got out of the car first, slamming the door harder than necessary. Primrose appeared behind him, wearing a light gray dress and carrying a large bag over her shoulder. They were arguing about something. I couldn't hear their words, but I could see their gestures, tense postures and sharp movements. Then Primrose waved her hand as if dismissing all objections and headed for the house. Terrence followed her, hunched over and with his hands in his pockets. I stepped away from the window, adjusted my tie, and prepared to greet the unexpected guests. Strangely, I wasn't at all happy to see them. This had never happened before. No matter what our relationship was like, no matter how complicated their personalities were, they were still my family. But now I felt nothing but irritation. The doorbell rang insistently, as if someone had held their finger on the button longer than they should have. "Father!" Terrence exclaimed when I opened the door. "I hope we're not interrupting anything?" His voice sounded artificially cheerful, but his eyes avoided mine. "You wrote that you were coming on Saturday," I remarked, stepping aside to let them in. "Our plans changed," Primrose said, kissing me on the cheek. She smelled of sweet perfume and cigarettes. "I hope you don't mind us dropping in unannounced." "Of course not. You're always welcome." Lying came easily to me. Over the years as a lawyer, I had learned to tell polite lies without batting an eye. They walked into the living room, and I noticed Primrose glance around the room, lingering on the silver candlestick on the mantelpiece. Verity had bought it at auction in the 90s. It had cost a fortune. "Tea? Coffee?" I offered. "Anything stronger?" Terrence settled into my favorite chair, crossing his legs. "It's been a tough day." It was 2 in the afternoon. Too early for whiskey, but I didn't argue. I took a bottle of scotch and 2 glasses out of the sideboard. "Primrose?" "No, thank you. I'd prefer tea." I poured whiskey for my son and myself, then put the kettle on. We sat in awkward silence while I made tea for Primrose. "So what brought you to me on Thursday?" I asked, sitting down opposite them. Terrence took a sip of whiskey and grimaced. He never knew how to appreciate good alcohol. "We wanted to see you, that's all. Do you need a special reason to visit your father?" "Usually you do," I replied calmly, looking him straight in the eye. Primrose coughed to get his attention. "Actually, Jervis, we have some news. It's not very pleasant, but we decided you should know." I looked. "Terrence lost his job," Primrose said, looking at me with an expression that was supposed to look sad, but looked more like calculation. "3 months ago. We tried to manage on our own, but now you need money," I finished for her. "Not necessarily money," Terrence hastened to add. "Maybe you could help me with your contacts. You still have connections in legal circles, don't you? Maybe someone is looking for a design consultant? You know I've been retired for 10 years. My contacts are out of date. But you're still in touch with Hamish Baldwin and Edna Crispin, I know. And they're still working." I was surprised he remembered those names. Hamish and Edna had indeed been my colleagues, and we spoke on the phone from time to time. "They're corporate lawyers, Terrence. What do they need a design consultant for?" "Listen," he leaned forward, squeezing his whiskey glass so hard that his knuckles turned white. "I need a job. Any job. Primrose and I are barely making ends meet. We have debts for the apartment, for the car." "The car?" I raised an eyebrow. "The one I gave you money for last year?" "Those are different payments," Primrose quickly interjected. "Insurance, repairs. You know how it is with cars." I knew they were lying, not for the first time, but usually the lies were more skillful, less obvious and clumsy. Something had changed, and it made me wary. "How much do you need?" I asked bluntly. They exchanged glances, as if they hadn't expected that question. "5,000, Terrence said. "That'll be enough to tide us over until I find a job." "6, Primrose corrected him. "5 will be tight." I took a sip of whiskey, feeling it burn my throat. It was a lot of money, but not critical for me. I could have given them the money without thinking twice. I would have done so before, but now something was holding me back. Maybe it was their unexpected arrival, or the way Primrose looked at things in the house, or the way Terrence avoided my gaze when he talked about his problems. "I'll think about it," I finally said. You'll think about it? Terrence straightened up, his face contorted with indignation. Father, we don't have time to wait for you to think. We need the money now. Terrence, Primrose said warningly, placing her hand on his knee. No, Primrose, I won't be silent. He turned to me, and I saw something new in his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. Anger? Despair? You sit here in this huge house alone, with all your money, and you won't even help your own son. I didn't say I wouldn't help, I replied calmly. I said I'd think about it. What is there to think about? He almost shouted. It's a ridiculous amount for you. You won't even notice it's gone. Terrence, Primrose raised her voice. Stop it. You're going to ruin everything. Those words seemed to sober him up. He leaned back in his chair and took a deep breath. I'm sorry, Father. I'm just on edge. The last few months have been difficult. I nodded but didn't answer. I needed time to process what had just happened. My son had changed, and not for the better. He had become harsh and disrespectful. Or maybe he had always been like that, but had been better at hiding it before. I'll make dinner, I said, getting up. Make yourself comfortable in the meantime. Your room is ready, as always. Thank you, Jervis, Primrose smiled at me. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. We really appreciate your hospitality. I went to the kitchen, leaving them in the living room. Cooking always calmed me down. There is something meditative about cutting vegetables, mixing ingredients, watching a dish take shape and develop flavor. Verity was the best cook in the family, but after her death, I learned to cook simple but delicious meals. Today I decided to make roast beef. Terrence loved it as a child. As I cooked, my thoughts revolved around the strange behavior of my son and his wife. Why did they come early? Why are they so nervous about money? What is going on in their lives that they are not telling me? Lunch passed in tense silence, interrupted only by Primrose's falsely cheerful comments about the weather and the news. Terrence hardly spoke, focusing on his food and the wine I had opened for dinner. He drank almost the entire bottle himself. After dinner, I excused myself, saying I was tired, and went to my study, leaving them in the living room. They didn't object. They even seemed glad to be left alone. In the evening, when I came out of my study to make dinner, I heard their voices coming from the guest bedroom. The door was ajar, and their words came through clearly. Too long to wait, Terrence was saying. He could live another 10 years with his health. Have you seen how he moves? Like a damn robot, not a single unnecessary movement. Calm down, Primrose replied. We'll get the 6,000 and then think about what to do next. Maybe he'll agree to transfer the house to you. He doesn't need it. It's too big for one person. He'll never agree. You don't know him. He controls every penny, every square centimeter of his property. Then we'll have to wait. For what? His death? There was a pause and I held my breath. Yes, Primrose finally said so quietly that I could barely hear her. Exactly that. It's the natural order of things, Terrence. Parents die, children inherit. It's always been that way. But the collectors won't wait, Terrence's voice broke. If we don't pay by the end of the month, they'll start foreclosure proceedings. Do you understand what that means? We'll lose everything. How much are we talking about? Primrose asked. You never told me. Another pause, then a quiet, 42,000. What? Primrose exclaimed. How did you manage to get into so much debt? It's not all my debt, Terrence defended himself. Part of it is your credit cards. 10,000, 15 at most. Where did the rest come from? It doesn't matter. The main thing is that we need money and fast. 6,000 from Dad is a drop in the bucket. Maybe we could convince him to sell the house, Primrose suggested. It's worth at least $500,000. If he sold it and moved into an apartment or a retirement home? He'll never agree, Terrence repeated. This house is all he has left of his mother. He'd rather die than sell it. Then maybe he should rewrite his will. Name you as his sole heir, and we could take out a loan against the future inheritance? Do you think the bank will give us a loan against the inheritance of a 75-year-old man? Terrence smiled bitterly. No chance. I backed away from the door, trying not to make a sound. Now everything was clear. They hadn't come just for the money. They were counting on my inheritance. They were waiting for me to die, counting the days, estimating how long I had left to live. My own family, my son and his wife. the people who should be closest to me. I returned to my office and sat down at my desk, looking at Verity's photo. What would she say now? What would she do in my place? I didn't know. For the first time in my life, I really didn't know what to do. But one thing was clear. I could no longer trust my own son. You're absolutely right. It's my mistake. In the third chapter, he only discovers that the ring has fallen into a sewer grate, and he retrieves it in the fourth. Let's correct the third chapter according to the plan. I didn't sleep all night. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling and listening to the clock ticking on the bedside table. My thoughts wouldn't let me rest. Again and again, I replayed the conversation I had overheard in my head. Every word, every intonation. Terrence and Primrose were waiting for me to die. They were making plans for my money, for my house. My own son was counting the days until he could claim his inheritance. By morning, I had made my decision. It was the only thing that seemed right in this situation. I can't say it was easy. My heart was aching with pain and disappointment, but I knew I had to do it. When the first rays of sunlight penetrated the room through the cracks in the curtains, I got up, took a shower, shaved carefully, and put on my best suit, dark gray with a subtle pinstripe, which I usually saved for special occasions. I tied the tie Verity had given me on our last wedding anniversary, dark blue with a small geometric pattern. I went down to the kitchen and started making breakfast. Eggs and bacon, toast, orange juice, coffee. Everything Terrence likes. I covered the table with a white tablecloth and took out our best china, the set Verity and I received as a wedding gift and had cherished for decades. I placed a small wooden box on the table next to my place setting. It contained Verity's wedding ring. After her death, I couldn't bring myself to put it away somewhere far away, so I always kept it with me. Sometimes, when I was alone, I would open the box and stare at the ring for a long time, remembering the day I put it on my bride's finger. Terrence and Primrose came down for breakfast around 9. They looked rumpled and sleep-deprived, especially Terrence. His eyes were red, as if he had spent the night drinking. "Good morning," I greeted them. "Sit down. Breakfast is ready." They exchanged glances, clearly surprised by my festive appearance and the exquisite table setting. "Is it a special occasion, Father?" Terrence asked, taking a seat. "You could say that," I replied, pouring coffee into the cups. "I have some news I'd like to discuss with you." "News?" Primrose looked alarmed. "I hope it's nothing bad." "It depends on your point of view." I sat down at the table, put some scrambled eggs on my plate, and took a sip of coffee. They waited, not touching their food. The tension in the air was palpable. "I've decided to rewrite my will," I finally said, looking my son straight in the eye. Terrence froze, his fork suspended in midair. "Rewrite your will?" he repeated. "What do you mean?" "Exactly that. I have considered my position and realized that my previous arrangements regarding my estate no longer reflect my wishes. And what do you plan to change?" Primrose's voice sounded deceptively calm, but I could see her knuckles turning white as she gripped her knife and fork. "I've decided to revise the list of heirs," I replied. I can't say I enjoyed the situation, but there was something satisfying about finally seeing my son's true colors. "I haven't made a final decision yet," I said. "Maybe some of it will go to distant relatives. Maybe I'll set up a trust fund. Or maybe I'll just sell everything and enjoy the rest of my years spending money on travel and entertainment." "You can't do that." Terrence slammed his fist on the table, causing the dishes to jump. "It's my money, my inheritance." "Yours?" I raised an eyebrow. "As far as I remember, I'm still alive. It's my property, and I have the right to dispose of it as I see fit." "After everything we've done for you?" Primrose interjected. Her voice trembled with barely contained anger. "We visited you, took care of you." "You visited when you needed money," I interrupted her. "You took care of me when it was convenient. Let's not be hypocritical, Primrose. We all know why you're here." "That's not true," she exclaimed, but her protest sounded false even to herself. Terrence stood up, his chair tipping backward with a crash. "You're an old, selfish bastard," he shouted. "All you've done your whole life is control everyone around you. Mom was unhappy with you, you know that? She only stayed out of a sense of duty." Those words hit me like a slap in the face. Verity? Unhappy? We had been together for almost half a century, and I had always thought our marriage was a happy one. Were we the perfect couple? No. Did we have difficulties? Of course. But I never thought she was unhappy. You know nothing about my relationship with your mother, I replied, trying to remain calm. And that has nothing to do with my decision. It does, Terrence almost shouted. You always put your desires above everyone else's. Above Mom. Above me. You don't care about your family, you only think about yourself. Terrence, Primrose began warningly, but he wasn't listening. You know what? He leaned over the table, his face contorted with rage. I'm tired of waiting. Tired of pretending I care about you. You were never a real father. You were an ATM. That's what you were to me. Is that your final word? I asked quietly. Yes, he shouted, and at that moment his gaze fell on the box with Verity's ring. And stop clinging to the past. He grabbed the box before I could react. Terrence, no, I exclaimed, standing up. But it was too late. He opened the box, took out the ring, and walked over to the window and threw it open. Give me my inheritance, he shouted. Stop clinging to the past. And with that, he threw the ring out the window. The world seemed to freeze. I saw the ring glint in the sun before it disappeared from view. My ears were ringing. My heart was pounding so hard that it felt like it was about to jump out of my chest. Primrose stood frozen with her mouth open, unable to believe her eyes. Even Terrence seemed shocked by his own actions. He stood by the window, breathing heavily, his hands shaking. I slowly walked around the table and approached him. He was a head taller than me, broader in the shoulders, but at that moment, he cowered as if waiting for a blow. Tomorrow you and your wife will be out on the street, I said in an icy voice. Terrence turned pale. All his anger evaporated instantly, replaced by fear. Father, I didn't mean to. You did, I interrupted him. That's exactly what you wanted to do, to show me how little my life, my feelings, and the memory of your mother mean to you. Well, you succeeded. Jervis, Primrose intervened, standing up. Terrence got carried away. He's not himself because of all these debt problems. You know he's not like that. No, I shook my head. That's exactly who he is. I just didn't want to see it. But now everything has fallen into place. I headed for the kitchen door. Where are you going? Terrence asked, confused. To look for your mother's ring, I replied without turning around. And when I come back, I want you both to start packing. I'm giving you 24 hours. After that, the security company will be instructed to consider you unwanted visitors. I left the house and headed for the place where the ring might have fallen. It was a small lawn under the kitchen window, leading to the driveway. I carefully examined the grass, but the ring was nowhere to be seen. My heart sank with grief. That ring was a symbol of my entire life with Verity, my last material connection to her. I couldn't let it be lost because of my ungrateful son's fit of anger. I knelt down, pushing the grass aside with my hands, searching the ground for a glint of metal. Nothing. The ring seemed to have vanished. Then I noticed a sewer grate a few meters from the window. My heart sank. Could it be? I walked over to the grate and crouched down next to it. I looked down into the darkness but saw nothing. I took my phone out of my pocket and turned on the flashlight, and there at the bottom, among the leaves and dirt, something glinted. I aimed the flashlight beam more precisely. Yes, it was it. Verity's ring had fallen into the sewer grate and now lay there out of reach. I sat down on the ground, not caring that I was getting my best suit dirty. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not now, not because of this. I had to think of something. The grate was firmly embedded in concrete. It couldn't be lifted just like that. I would need tools, maybe help. But one thing I knew for sure, I would get that ring. And when I did, when I got back my last memory of Verity, I would sever all ties with the son who had so easily given up everything that should have been sacred to him. I got up off the ground and looked at my house. Through the kitchen window, I could see the silhouettes of Terrence and Primrose. They were arguing fiercely about something, waving their arms. They were probably deciding what to do next, how to get out of the situation they had gotten themselves into. But that was no longer my concern. I had made my decision, and it was final. I headed to the garage to find some tools. Verity's ring had to come home, and Terrence and Primrose had to leave it behind forever. In the garage, I rummaged through the tools for a long time, trying to find something suitable for removing the ring from the sewer grate. A crowbar, screwdrivers, pliers. Nothing seemed suitable. My heart was pounding with anxiety. What if it rained and washed the ring deeper into the sewer? What if someone else found it before I did? I looked out of the garage and saw Albert Paxton, my neighbor on the left, trimming his hedge. An elderly African-American, a retired civil engineer who had retired 10 years ago. He was always friendly and helpful. We weren't close friends, but we had maintained a neighborly relationship all these years. "Albert," I called out to him. He looked up, noticed me, and waved. "Good morning, Jervis. Beautiful day, isn't it?" I walked over to him, not caring that my suit was still dirty from searching for the ring. "I need your help," I said without preamble. "Verity's engagement ring fell into a sewer grate. I don't know how to get it out." Albert immediately put down his garden shears. "Verity's ring? Oh, that's serious. Show me where it happened." I led him to the grate. Albert knelt down, shining his flashlight into the dark depths of the drain. "I see it," he said after a minute. "It's not that deep, but I'll have to remove the grate. I have tools in the shed. I'll go get them." While he was fetching the tools, I looked at the house again. No one was visible in the kitchen window anymore. I wonder what Terrence and Primrose are doing now. Have they realized how serious I am? Albert returned with a bag of tools and a small jack. "Now we'll lift it up," he said, placing the jack next to the grate. "I used to work for the city sewer service a long time ago, so I know these things like the back of my hand." He skillfully wielded his tools, and soon the grate was lifted enough to allow him to reach inside. "I'll get it," I said, kneeling down. "Be careful," Albert warned. "The edges might be sharp." I slowly reached into the gap and felt for the ring among the debris and dirt at the bottom. When my fingers closed around it, I felt an incredible sense of relief. I carefully pulled the ring out and clenched it in my fist. "Thank you, Albert," I said sincerely. "You have no idea how important this is to me." He smiled as he lowered the grate back into place. "You're welcome, neighbor." Verity was a remarkable woman. We all miss her. I opened my palm and looked at the ring. It was dirty but undamaged. A simple gold band with a small diamond, all we could afford back then, at the beginning of our life together. Verity never wanted to replace it with something more expensive, even when we had the money. "It's been with us all along," she said. "It holds our whole story." "Do you have guests?" Albert asked, nodding toward the house where Terrence's car was parked in the driveway. "My son," I replied curtly. "Ah, Terrence," Albert nodded. "Haven't seen him in a while. How is he?" I clenched the ring in my fist. "Not too well, I'm afraid." Albert seemed to pick up on something in my tone because he didn't ask any further questions. "Well, if you need any more help, you know where to find me," he said, gathering his tools. I thanked him again and headed for the house. On the way, I stopped at the garden hose to wash the dirt off the ring. The water washed away the tarnish, and the gold shone again in the sun. I carefully wiped the ring with a handkerchief and put it in my pocket. As I entered the house, I heard muffled voices coming from the guest bedroom. Terrence and Primrose were arguing. Their voices were tense and agitated. "You ruined everything," Primrose said. "We could have persuaded him, gradually, but no, you had to make a scene." "He would never have agreed," Terrence objected. "You don't know him like I do. He's always been a stubborn old—" "He was willing to give us $6,000. That would have been enough to buy us some time. But now we have nothing. No money, no place to live. We'll think of something." Terrence's voice sounded uncertain. "Maybe Randall could lend us some money." "Randall?" Primrose laughed bitterly. "Are you out of your mind? We already owe him $15,000. He'd rather beat the debt out of you than give you more." I walked away from the door, not wanting to hear any more. Their problems were none of my concern now. I took the ring out of my pocket and stared at it for a long time, sitting in my office. It seemed so small, so fragile in my aging hands. But it had survived so many years, so many trials, and now it had survived another, the betrayal of a son. I remembered the day Terrence was born. Verity held him in her arms, so tiny, with a wrinkled red face. "Look, Jervis," she said then, "he looks like you." I didn't see the resemblance, but I was so proud, so happy. My son, my flesh and blood. And then came the years of growing up. Terrence had always been a difficult child, stubborn, willful. He showed signs of selfishness early on. which I diligently ignored. When he was 6, he broke a porcelain figurine that Verity had brought back from Italy, simply because we wouldn't buy him a toy at the store. At 10, he demanded the most expensive bike he saw at a neighbor's house and threw a tantrum when we suggested something simpler. At 15, he took my car without asking and scratched it, then lied and said someone else had done it. Each time I found excuses. He's still young. He's just going through a difficult age. He'll learn responsibility. He'll grow up. But he didn't grow up. Instead, his selfishness only grew. College, which he dropped out of after 2 years. A series of failed jobs, each ending for the same reason. Terrence couldn't follow rules, take direction, or respect authority. A series of failed relationships before Primrose, each ending in scandal and recriminations. And then Primrose came along. I remember Verity saying to me after their first meeting, "She's right for him." And that wasn't a compliment. They were like two peas in a pod, both selfish, both greedy, both willing to use others for their own benefit. I remembered how Terrence asked for money for the wedding. "Just a little, Father," he said. "We want a small ceremony only for our closest friends and family." A little turned into $30,000, and a small ceremony turned into an extravagant event at a country club where half of Verity's and my friends weren't invited, but there was room for all the right people that Terrence and Primrose wanted to impress. I remembered how Terrence insisted that Verity and I give them money for the down payment on the house. "It's an investment in your grandchildren's future," he said. But there were no grandchildren, and they sold the house 3 years later at a profit, which they immediately spent on new cars and a vacation in the Maldives. I remembered how, after Verity died, Terrence came to help with things. He spent more time appraising her jewelry and antique furniture than actually helping me cope with my loss. When I refused to sell the house and move to something smaller, as he suggested, he got angry and didn't call me for almost 6 months. All these memories flashed before my mind's eye, forming a picture of a man I never really knew, my own son. Maybe I really was a bad father. Maybe I worked too much and paid too little attention to his upbringing. Maybe if I had spent more time with him when he was a child, he would have grown up to be a different person. But then I remembered Verity. She was always there for him, always supportive, always loving. And it didn't change who he was. She saw him for who he was and loved him anyway, because he was her son. And I loved him too, no matter what. But love doesn't mean you have to let yourself be used. Love doesn't mean you have to put up with disrespect and cruelty. This morning, when he threw away Verity's ring, he crossed the line. He didn't just insult me, he insulted the memory of his mother, the woman who gave him life and loved him unconditionally. I carefully placed the ring back in the box and closed it. My decision was made. Terrence and Primrose had to go. I wouldn't let them stay a minute longer than necessary. And I wouldn't give them a penny of my money, not now, not after I died. I took out my phone and dialed the number of Rhonda Miller, my old colleague, and one of the few friends I had left. Rhonda was a lawyer specializing in wills and estates. She answered on the third ring. "Jervis," she said, sounding surprised. "It's been a long time. How are you?" "I need your help, Rhonda," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "I want to change my will, completely, and I want to do it as soon as possible." There was a pause, then Rhonda replied, "Of course, Jervis. I can see you tomorrow morning at 10. Is that okay?" "Perfect. I'll be at your office." "Is everything all right?" she asked cautiously. "You sound tense." "Everything's fine," I replied. "I just made an important decision that was long overdue." We said goodbye and I put the phone down. Then I got up and walked over to the window. From there I could see the garden that Verity loved so much. The roses had faded, but the bushes were still strong, ready for winter. They would survive the cold and bloom again in the spring. Life goes on, no matter what. I heard footsteps outside my office door, then a hesitant knock. "Dad?" Terrence's voice sounded uncertain. "May I come in?" I clutched the box with the ring in my hand. "Come in." The door opened and Terrence appeared in the doorway. He looked haggard, his eyes red. Primrose loomed behind him, but she did not enter the study. "Father, he began, but I raised my hand to stop him. "I found the ring," I said, showing him the box. "It fell into a sewer grate, but I managed to get it out. I I'm glad, he shifted from foot to foot. Listen, about tomorrow. I won't change my mind, Terrence, I interrupted him. You'll leave tomorrow, as I said, and I'll change the will. But no buts, this conversation is over. I sat down at the desk and opened the drawer, taking out the papers I had been looking at yesterday. I pretended to be completely absorbed in my work. Terrence stood there for a few more seconds, then sighed heavily and left, closing the door behind him. I only looked up when I heard their footsteps receding down the hallway. The box with Verity's ring was in front of me on the table. I opened it and looked at the ring again, glistening in the dim light of the office. I'll do what I have to do, Verity, I whispered, even if it breaks my heart. The morning was cold and cloudy. Lead-colored clouds covered the sky, promising rain. I woke up early, before 6, and lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't sleep. There were too many thoughts swirling around in my head. Yesterday's events, the upcoming meeting with Rhonda, the need to finally break off relations with my son, all of this weighed heavily on me. At 7, I got up, took a shower, and shaved. Today I chose a dark blue suit, the one I once wore to the most important negotiations of my career. The winner's suit, as Verity called it. There was no sound coming from the guest room. Terrence and Primrose were probably still asleep, or they were pretending to be asleep to avoid seeing me. Either way, it suited me. I had more important things to do. I ate breakfast in silence, then called the security company I had been using for many years. I explained the situation and asked them to send someone at 4 o'clock. They agreed without asking any questions. I had always appreciated their professionalism. At 9:30, I left the house and got into my old but immaculately maintained Cadillac. I never saw Terrence and Primrose. They didn't come out to say goodbye, and I didn't look for them. Rhonda's office was in downtown South Burlington, in a small 2-story red brick building. I parked right in front of the entrance. The meeting was still 15 minutes away, but Rhonda was already waiting for me in her office. Jervis, she stood up to greet me. It's good to see you, even though the circumstances aren't the most pleasant. Rhonda Miller, a petite woman in her early 60s with short gray hair and piercing hazel eyes, was one of the few people I truly trusted. We had worked together for almost 30 years and remained friends after my retirement. Thank you for agreeing to meet so quickly, I said, sitting down in the chair opposite her. Anything for you, she smiled, but her eyes betrayed her concern. So what's going on? You mentioned completely changing your will. I told her everything, about Terrence and Primrose's visit, about the conversation I overheard, about the ring I threw away. Rhonda listened attentively without interrupting, only occasionally taking notes. I want to disinherit Terrence, I concluded, completely. No house, no money, no other assets. Rhonda sighed. That's a serious step, Jervis. Are you sure? He is your son after all. Not anymore, I replied firmly. He made his choice. I'm making mine. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. All right, legally it's entirely possible. You have the right to dispose of your property as you wish, but we'll need to consider the possibility of the will being contested. Terrence may try to prove that you were incompetent or under duress when you changed it. I am of sound mind and memory, I said, smiling slightly at the old legal phrase, and I am prepared to undergo any medical examination to prove it. Excellent. Then let's discuss the details. Who do you want to leave your property to? I thought about it. There weren't many people left in my life whom I could trust with my inheritance. Verity was the only person I wanted to share everything I had with, but she was gone. I have an idea, I said after a pause. I want to divide my estate into several parts. Rhonda took out a notebook and pen. I'm listening. I want to sell the house and the land around it and divide the money. I want to divide it between several organizations. Half to the children's home in Burlington. Verity and I donated to them regularly. They do important work. And the other half? I smiled. It will be a surprise for Terrence. I want to leave it to an animal shelter. Verity always wanted to get a dog, but I was against it. Too much noise, hair, mess. Now I realize I was wrong. Maybe even the children's photos? The family albums? I thought about it. Her question made sense. Despite everything that had happened, Terrence was part of Verity's in my life. To erase him completely would be to erase part of our history. All right, I said finally. We'll make copies of the family albums. The originals could stay in the museum, and the copies could be given to Terrence if he ever wanted them. Rhonda nodded. I think that's fair. Rhonda and I spent the next 2 hours discussing the details of the new will. She asked questions, suggested options, and warned me about possible legal pitfalls. I was grateful for her experience and professionalism. When everything was decided, Rhonda drafted a document, which we reviewed carefully. It will take a few days to prepare the final version and register it properly, she said when we were done. But as of today, this draft is legally binding if everything is in order. Everything is in order, I confirmed, signing each page. Leaving Rhonda's office, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders. The decision had been made, and there was no turning back. Strangely enough, I felt no regret. Only a quiet, calm confidence that I had done the right thing. On my way home, I decided to stop by Bethany Hammond's, my cousin who lived on the other side of town. We hadn't seen each other in several months, and I thought it was a good time to visit. Besides, I needed a distraction before the inevitable confrontation with Terrence and Primrose. Bethany was delighted by my visit. We drank tea in her cozy living room and talked about the weather, her grandchildren, and books we had recently read. It was a pleasant, non-committal conversation until Bethany suddenly mentioned Terrence. He called me last week, she said casually. He asked about your health. I froze with the cup to my lips. My health? Yes, and your finances too, Bethany frowned. To be honest, his question seemed strange to me. He asked if you had said anything about your will, about how your property was distributed. He even wondered if you had any hidden accounts or real estate that he didn't know about. I slowly put the cup down on the saucer. And what did you say to him? That I didn't know, of course, she shrugged. It's none of my business, and certainly none of his. I told him he should ask you directly if he was so interested, but I found it unpleasant, as if he were already dividing up your inheritance, even though, thank God, you're alive and well. I nodded, feeling a cold anger rising inside me. Thanks for telling me, Bethany. He didn't just call me, she added cautiously. Harold Daniels, remember him? Your mutual friend from the law firm. He mentioned that Terrence had been asking him about your investments. That was too much. Terrence wasn't just waiting for me to die. He was actively preparing for it, gathering information about my assets behind my back. And what did Harold tell him? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Nothing specific, Bethany assured me. Harold is old school. He understands the value of confidentiality. But the very fact that Terrence was asking such questions alarmed him, and he decided you should know about it. I was grateful to Harold for his caution. We had started our careers together, and although we had seen little of each other in recent years, I could always rely on him. Did Terrence say anything about his plans? I asked. Why he wanted this information? Bethany shook her head. Only that he wants to get his affairs in order and needs to know what he can count on in the future. He mentioned some investment opportunities, buying a house. It's all rather vague. I see, I said, finishing my tea. Thank you, Bethany. That's important information. Jervis, she leaned across the table, her face troubled. What's going on between you two? I've never interfered in your relationship, but now I feel like something is seriously wrong. I sighed. Bethany was one of the few family members with whom I had remained on good terms after Verity's death. She deserved at least a partial explanation. Terrence has changed, Bethany, I said. Or maybe he's always been this way, and I just didn't want to see it. He's waiting for me to die so he can get his inheritance. And from the looks of it, he's taking certain steps to speed up the process. Jervis, Bethany exclaimed, her eyes widening in horror. You don't think Terrence is capable of... I don't know what he's capable of, I interrupted her. And I don't want to find out. I changed the will. Terrence won't get anything anymore. Bethany looked at me for a long time, then slowly nodded. I understand. And if you ask me, you did the right thing. Verity wouldn't have approved of his behavior. We both fell silent, remembering the woman we loved. Verity had always been the voice of reason and compassion in our family. She defended Terrence, found excuses for his actions. But even she, I think, could not have forgiven what he did with her wedding ring. I quickly ended my visit and drove home, thinking about what I had learned. The puzzle was coming together, and the picture was ugly. Terrence was in debt, possibly due to gambling or some risky investments. He was counting on my inheritance to solve all his problems and couldn't wait for me to die a natural death. So he began to prepare, figuring out exactly what he could count on. The drive home took about 20 minutes. I drove slowly, enjoying the peace and quiet in the car. Outside the window, the familiar landscapes of South Burlington floated by. Neat houses with manicured lawns, shops where Verity and I used to shop, the park where we used to walk on weekends. Every place held memories. Every turn in the road was familiar down to the smallest detail. I thought about how I might soon be leaving this town. Why stay when the last thread connecting me to it, family ties, has been severed? Maybe it's time to start a new chapter of my life somewhere else. Somewhere without painful memories, where I could just be an old man enjoying the peace and quiet. Another surprise awaited me at home. Albert Paxton, my neighbor who had helped me get the ring, was standing at my door. "Ah, Jervis, there you are," he said when he saw me. "I wanted to talk to you about something." I invited him in, but he shook his head. "No, it won't take long. I just wanted to warn you. Your son came to see me this morning after you left. He asked about your habits, who comes to see you, whether you have a safe in the house." Strange questions. I didn't tell him anything, of course, but I thought you should know. I thanked him, feeling the anger inside me turn to cold fury. Terrence wasn't just gathering information. He was planning something specific. I didn't know what, but I was going to find out. "And one more thing," Albert added, looking around as if afraid we were being overheard. "I saw him rummaging through your mailbox. He took out some letters and put them in his pocket. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't mean anything, but it seems suspicious to me. That was already a violation of the law. Intercepting someone else's mail is a federal crime. Was Terrence so desperate that he was willing to risk imprisonment? What was he looking for in my letters? Bank statements? Medical information?" "Thanks, Albert," I said, my voice sounding calmer than I felt. "I'll take care of it." Albert nodded, clearly relieved to have fulfilled his duty as a neighbor. "If you need help, you know where to find me." He patted me on the shoulder and headed for his house. I took a deep breath before going inside. I had to stay calm, not give in to anger. Terrence had crossed another line, but that only strengthened my conviction that I had made the right decision. When I entered the house, I immediately heard voices coming from the living room. Terrence and Primrose didn't notice my arrival and continued talking. "If he really changes the will, we'll be left with nothing," Primrose said. "We have no choice, Terrence. We need to find those documents." "I already searched his study while he was out," Terrence replied irritably. "Nothing. No will. No bank statements. Nothing useful." "What about the safe?" "You said he must have a safe." "If he does, it's damn well hidden. I couldn't find it." I walked quietly across the hall and stood in the living room doorway. They were sitting on the sofa with their backs to me and didn't notice my presence. "Looking for something specific?" I asked calmly. They jumped as if they had been electrocuted and turned around. Terrence's face turned pale and Primrose tried to smile, but it came out unconvincing. "Father!" "We didn't hear you come in." Terrence tried to sound casual, but his voice was shaking. "Obviously." I entered the living room and sat down in the armchair opposite them. "You were too busy planning the search of my house." "What?" "No, you misunderstood." "I understand perfectly well, Terrence. You and Primrose are waiting for me to die so you can get your inheritance. But you don't have the patience, so you decided to speed up the process. First by finding out exactly how much you'll get after my death, and then perhaps by helping that death come sooner." "What nonsense!" Terrence exclaimed, but fear flashed in his eyes. "We never—" "Don't lie to me," I interrupted. "I know about your calls to Bethany, Harold, and probably other people who could tell you about my finances. I know you've been asking my neighbors about my habits and whether I have a safe. I know about your debts. 42,000, if I'm not mistaken?" Terrence opened his mouth but couldn't say a word. Primrose sat motionless, as if frozen. "I know you've been intercepting my mail," I continued. "That's a federal crime, by the way. I could report you to the police. I didn't take your mail," Terrence muttered, but his eyes darted around, avoiding my gaze. "You were seen, Terrence." I shook my head. "But it doesn't matter anymore. I saw my lawyer today. I changed my will. You won't get a cent. Neither you nor your wife. Ever." "You can't do that." Primrose jumped to her feet. "We're your family." "No," I shook my head. My family doesn't wait for me to die, rummage through my things looking for money, or throw away memories of my late wife in a fit of rage. It was a momentary lapse. Terrence finally found his voice. I didn't mean to. I was desperate, Father. These debts, they're ruining our lives. The collectors call every day, threatening. And whose fault are these debts? I asked coldly. Who lost at the casino? Who took out loans they couldn't repay? Who lived beyond their means for years? It's not just my fault, he tried to defend himself. The economy, the job market. Enough! I raised my hand, stopping the stream of excuses. I don't want to hear your lies anymore. You have 24 hours to pack your things and leave my house. By 4 o'clock tomorrow, I want you gone. What if we refuse to leave? Primrose asked defiantly. Then you'll be escorted out by security guards who will arrive tomorrow at 4 o'clock sharp. I smiled without a hint of amusement. And they may have to call the police if you resist. Do you want to make a scene in front of the neighbors? I don't mind. I have nothing left to lose. Terrence looked at me suspiciously. Are you really going to throw your own son out on the street, knowing that now you have to live with the consequences of that decision? Father, please. Terrence suddenly fell to his knees in front of me. I know I did a terrible thing. I wasn't myself. I swear it won't happen again. Give us another chance. We'll make it right, I promise. His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I saw in him the little boy I once taught to ride a bike. There are no more chances, Terrence, I said quietly. You've used them all up. 24 hours, not a minute more. Primrose went over to Terrence and helped him up. His face was wet with tears, but I saw no real remorse in his eyes, only fear of a future without my financial support. You'll regret this, Primrose hissed. When you find yourself alone, completely alone, you'll regret driving away the only people who could have taken care of you. If your care looks like it has these past few days, then I'd rather do without it, I replied calmly. And I've been alone for a long time, Primrose. Ever since Verity died. I just didn't want to admit it. I turned and left the living room, leaving them standing there in a daze. In my study, I closed the door, sat down at my desk, and stared at Verity's photograph for a long time. She was smiling in the photo, and her eyes had the same warmth as they did on the day the picture was taken. We were on vacation, staying at a small hotel by the sea. Verity had insisted that we go, even though I was busy with important work. Work can wait, Jervis, but life can't, she said at the time. And she was right, as always. The morning of their departure was unexpectedly clear. After yesterday's rain, the sky had cleared, and the sun's rays penetrated the curtains into my bedroom. I woke up early as usual, but didn't rush downstairs. I didn't want to run into Terrence and Primrose any more than necessary. Muffled sounds came from the room across the hall. They were packing their things. Occasionally I could hear their voices, but I couldn't make out the words. Nor did I want to. Everything that needed to be said had already been said yesterday. At 10 o'clock, I finally went down to the kitchen and made myself some coffee. I sat down at the table and opened the newspaper, but the lines blurred before my eyes. My thoughts were far away. I remembered Terrence as a child, his first steps, his first words, his first day at school. How he proudly showed me his drawings, how he asked me to read him another bedtime story, how he hugged me tightly when I came home from work. Where was that boy now? At what point had he turned into the man who threw his mother's wedding ring away in a fit of rage? Maybe I really was to blame for what he had become. Maybe if I had worked less and spent more time with him, if I hadn't been so demanding and strict, if I had told him more often that I loved him. I pushed those thoughts away. It's pointless now to wonder what might have been. I could make it all right. I slowly folded the newspaper and looked at him. No, Terrence, some things can't be made right. He stood shifting from foot to foot, as if waiting for something else. Farewell words, a hug, a blessing. I remained silent. Well, he finally said. Goodbye, Father. Goodbye, I replied. Primrose said nothing. She gave me one last look, a mixture of hurt and anger, and left. Terrence followed her, slamming the front door loudly behind him. I didn't move. I sat and listened to the car starting, the tires rustling on the gravel driveway, the sound of the engine gradually fading into the distance. Only when complete silence fell did I allow myself to breathe out. They were gone. Really gone. Despite my determination, somewhere deep inside there was a small hope that Terrence would find the right words, make the right gesture that would make me change my mind. But that didn't happen. I got up and slowly walked around the house. Everything seemed strangely empty and quiet, even though Terrence and Primrose had only been staying here for a few days. The guest room was left in disarray. Crumpled bedding, open drawers, Primrose's hair clip forgotten on the nightstand. In the bathroom, empty tubes of toothpaste and shampoo. In the kitchen, an unwashed cup in the sink. I began to tidy up methodically, as I always did. I changed the bedding, washed the floors, dusted. Physical work helped me not to think, not to feel. By evening, the house was sparkling clean, but the feeling of emptiness did not go away. It settled not in the rooms, but inside me. I sat down in the armchair in the living room, the one where Verity usually sat with a book in her hands, and for the first time that day, I allowed myself to realize the reality of what had happened. My son was gone. Forever. I was left alone, completely alone. No one would come for the weekend, call to see how I was doing, or wish me a happy birthday or Christmas. No one would come to my funeral when the time came. That thought should have made me feel desperate, but instead I felt a strange bitterness mixed with relief. Bitterness at the realization that my family relationships had completely fallen apart. Relief that I no longer had to pretend that everything was fine. I took out a photo of Verity and stared at it for a long time. "What happened to us?" I whispered. "We spent so many years building a family, and in the end, there's nothing left." Of course, there was no answer. Only the evening breeze rustling the curtains and the ticking of the old clock on the mantelpiece. I woke up the next morning with a firm decision. This house, which Verity and I had built and lived in for decades, was now not a refuge for me, but a cage. Too many memories, too many ghosts of the past. I needed to change something, to start with a clean slate, as much as possible at my age. I decided to sell the house and move to another city. Not too far away. At my age, it's difficult to adapt to a completely new place, but far enough that I wouldn't be confronted with memories at every turn. Over the next few weeks, I prepared for the move. The hardest part was sorting through Terrence's things. His old toys, which I kept in the attic, school notebooks, teenage posters that he never took with him when he left for college. I held his first baseball glove in my hands for a long time, remembering how I taught him to catch a ball in the yard. In the end, I put it all in boxes and took it to the garage. Let the new owners decide what to do with it. The house sold faster than I expected. A young family with 2 small children fell in love with it at first sight. They talked about how great it would be to raise their children in such a spacious house with a large garden. I looked at their happy faces and thought about how Verity and I had once been the same, full of hopes and plans for the future. I found a small but cozy apartment in Burlington, overlooking the lake. Not far from my old home, but in a completely different setting. A modern building, minimalist design, no memories. Just what I needed. On moving day, I walked around the empty house one last time, saying goodbye to each room. I lingered longest in the bedroom where Verity had spent her last days. It seemed as if I could still catch the faint scent of her perfume. "Goodbye," I whispered, not sure to whom I was addressing these words. To the house, to Verity, or to my past life. As I closed the front door, the key turned in the lock with a final click. The chapter was closed. The first few days in the new apartment were strange. I woke up in the mornings disoriented, not understanding where I was. The familiar sounds of my old home, the creaking floorboards, the ticking of the grandfather clock, the rustling of leaves outside the window, were replaced by new ones. The hum of the elevator, the muffled voices of my neighbors, the noise of city traffic. But gradually I began to get used to it. I created new rituals, new routes. Morning walks along the lake, reading in a small cafe on the corner, evenings spent reading by the window overlooking the sunset. Life went on, albeit in a new format. I hadn't heard anything about Terrence and Primrose. I didn't know where they were, what they were doing, or whether they had solved their financial problems. Sometimes I caught myself thinking about them, worrying, but I immediately dismissed those thoughts. They had made their choice, I had made mine. One day, while sorting through boxes I hadn't had time to unpack yet, I came across an old photo album. It was hidden between books, and I had completely forgotten about it. Opening it, I saw pictures of our family, a young me and Verity holding newborn Terrence, his first birthday, his first day of school, his graduation. Sitting on the floor among the boxes, I leafed through the album, and the tears I had been holding back all these months finally found their way out. I cried for lost opportunities, for broken relationships, for things that cannot be returned or fixed. When the tears dried, I felt a strange calmness. The grief was still there, but it had become somehow quieter, like an old wound that only hurts when it rains. I put the album on the shelf next to Verity's photo. Let it stay there. It's part of my story, good or bad, but mine. 6 months have passed since Terrence and Primrose left my life. 6 months of a new reality that I was gradually getting used to. I found a certain rhythm, a certain peace in my solitude. Yes, I was alone, but in that solitude there was a freedom, a dignity. Better to be alone than with people who see you only as a source of money. Better quiet evenings with a book than fake smiles and feigned interest. In my new life, I found simple joys that I had not noticed before. The sunrise over the lake, the taste of freshly baked bread from the bakery on the first floor, conversations with neighbors, not deep but pleasant, without hidden motives or expectations. Of course, there were difficult moments. Days when the longing for the family I could have had became almost unbearable. Nights when I woke up with Verity's name on my lips, sweating from a nightmare in which I lost her again and again. Moments of weakness when I thought about calling Terrence, trying to fix everything, but I persevered. Each time I found the strength to continue living in a new way, without looking back. One evening, sitting by the window and watching the setting sun paint the lake in shades of gold and pink, I reflected on the price I had paid for my character and decisions in the past. My pedantry, my restraint, my desire for control. All of this shaped me as a person, but it also created a wall between me and my loved ones. Verity learned to live with it and accepted me for who I am. Terrence did not. Was I a good father? Probably not. At least not the kind Terrence needed. Was Terrence a good son? No, he wasn't either. We both made mistakes, and we are both responsible for what happened. But life doesn't end with mistakes. It goes on, offering new opportunities, new paths. At 75, I started a new chapter. Who knows what lies ahead? I got up and walked to the window, looking at the city spread out before me. The lights in the houses came on one after another, reflecting in the dark water of the lake. People were returning home from work, to their families, to their joys and problems. Life was bustling around me, and I was a part of it, albeit a small, inconspicuous one. I was no longer a lawyer, no longer a husband, no longer a father. I was simply Jervis Cornell, an old man who had finally found peace with himself. And perhaps that was the main lesson of my entire life. Verity, I think, would have understood me. She might even have approved of my choice. She always wanted me to be happy, even if that happiness didn't look the way others imagined it. I smiled at my reflection in the glass, an old wrinkled face, but eyes that were calm and clear. The eyes of a man who had gone through loss and betrayal, but had not broken. In the end, maybe that's what victory is. Not breaking when everything around you is falling apart. Continuing to live, breathe, feel. To accept each day as a gift, even if that day has to be spent alone. And who knows, maybe someday Terrence will understand. Maybe not now, not in a year, but someday. And if not, well, I've learned to live with that thought too. The sun finally disappeared behind the horizon, and the room was plunged into twilight. I lit the lamp and sat down in an armchair, opening the book I had started reading in the morning. Life went on, and I was ready for the next chapter, whatever it might be.